Why does exploding weak squares in chess feel risky? Imagine trying to plant a flag on a tiny, unstable island in the middle of a stormy sea. That's what moving a piece onto a weak square can feel like in chess. You see a promising outpost, but it's often surrounded by danger. Weak squares are spots on the board that pawns cannot defend because they are no longer protected or were never protected to begin with. These squares usually appear after pawn moves that leave gaps behind or when a bishop is exchanged, leaving certain color complexes open. Once a square becomes weak, it stays that way because pawns can't move backward to fix the problem. That's why they become prime targets for your opponent's pieces, especially knights, which love to sit on secure outposts. But here's the catch. To get a piece onto a weak square, you often have to send it deep into enemy territory. That piece might become exposed or vulnerable to attack. If the opponent spots your plan, they can challenge or even exchange off your piece. For example, if you place a knight on a weak square, your opponent might try to trade it off or attack it with multiple pieces. This can force you to retreat or lose material. Moving into these squares can also mean you give up something else in your position. Sometimes, you have to weaken your own pawn structure or sacrifice material to create or occupy a weak square. This creates a risk because your opponent might find ways to exploit your new weaknesses faster than you can capitalize on theirs. Not all weak squares are equally useful either. Some might be weak but not relevant to the main battle, or your opponent can easily defend them with a piece. If you misjudge the importance of a weak square, you could waste time or misplace your pieces, leaving your position worse than before. From a practical point of view, exploiting weak squares requires careful calculation. You need to judge if the weak square is truly vulnerable and if your pieces can maintain control there. You also have to think about what your opponent might do while you focus on that square. They might generate counterplay elsewhere on the board, making your plan less effective. So, why does exploiting weak squares feel risky? Because it involves sending your pieces into potentially dangerous spots, sometimes at a cost. It requires precise judgment to see if the weakness is real and worth the effort. You have to balance aggression with solid defense and always consider the bigger picture. If you rush in without thinking, you might find yourself overextended or vulnerable. But if you plan carefully, exploiting weak squares can turn into a powerful strategy. It's all about weighing the potential gains against the risks and knowing when the reward is worth the danger.